Hi everyone, this is Christopher Paolini. I'm here today at MizCon 30 in Missoula, Montana, which is a really fun sci-fi fantasy convention. And I'm talking here today with none other than Todd Lockwood. Now, most of you may know Todd as a painter, as an illustrator. You've been doing that for quite a while now, haven't you?
Yeah.
And you've painted covers for, everyone from R.A. Salvatore to,
I'm doing C.J. Cherry's covers for the Forerunner series right now. I've done some Tad Williams. I did Stephen Erickson for a while.
Yeah.
Probably most folks know me from Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, and Bob Salvatore's covers. R.A. Salvatore.
Suffice it to say, if you've read sci-fi fantasy, or walked into the sci-fi fantasy section in any bookstore, you've seen Todd's work. And you paint some of the best dragons around, I think.
Well, thank you.
Speaking of dragons, you are a first-time author now, right?
I am. Yeah.
And you have your book here. It's The Summer Dragon.
It's here, the Summer Dragon. It's I don't know. The genesis of this is convoluted and complicated. I've always been a writer. Mm-hmm. I learned to draw by writing, and I learned to write by drawing. I made my own comic books growing up, and in my mind I was telling myself a movie or a TV show. So I was learning what things looked like and how to portray them at the same time as I was taking in story structure and loving the story. I was writing a novel while I was in art school, but art paid the bills first. So the writer's muse got shunted aside for a while. She lived in a cage, and I fed her scraps from the DMing D&D game table. That's how I kept the writer's muse quiet.
And was there a specific inspiration for this book?
The actual inspiration for this book was I realized that I had things that I needed to say, and I needed a structure within which to say them. Trends in society that I wanted to talk about, and just questions of humanity and fair play, and stuff like that, the grist that grinds people up and makes them fun characters.
So now how was the transition for you for going from, as you said, you've been writing your whole life, but to go from doing that more as a hobby to then doing it on a professional scale?
Yeah, there was an education I needed to have, and I spent probably the first half of probably the first 5 years out of 7 or 8 that I worked on this, learning to craft. Making my mistakes and then fixing them, and reading books and doing mentorships with authors like Nancy Kress and Mary Rosenblum. Les Howell ran the Clarion Workshop in the Seattle area for years, and she sort of took me under her wing and was very helpful. She was like my first most willing beta reader, and so that was stage one. But I was also building the world and fleshing out the characters during that period. Once I got it to a point where I knew it, I was writing. If you sit down and just write it, it started to go pretty quickly.
So you had a good idea of the story before you actually dove into the main part of the book?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the world as well.
Yeah. I know how the whole 3-book arc goes.
So it is going to be a trilogy.
It's a trilogy.
As all good fantasy stories are.
So they say.
Of course, there's always the tendency to end up having 4 books or more when it's supposed to be a trilogy.
Not going to happen.
Awesome.
I can't let it happen.
Awesome.
I'm not young enough to stretch it out. I can't George R.R. Martin this thing.
Yeah.
I'd get in trouble.
So what was your actual writing process like once you were into the writing itself?
Do you mean, am I a pantser or an outliner? Or?
No, I mean, like, do you write by hand? Do you write on the computer?
Oh, I write on the computer. Yeah, I couldn't do it otherwise. My first book that I was working on in art school was longhand. That's part of the reason it got abandoned, is that transcribing that just became daunting as it became longer, and as I had more important things that I needed to do. And, there were no computers then. I'd have had to transcribe it with stones and sticks and dinosaur bones.
And was there something, this may not be a question you can answer, but it's something I know you've produced art in general for so long that something I always ask my interviewers, is Do you find yourself returning to some...
E.
Yes. Do you find yourself returning to some image, thought, or feeling in your work, whether it's the art or whether it's the writing, something that inspires you, something that you always find yourself drawn to?
Yeah, actually, oddly, it's balance. It's right there.
Perfect. And you painted the cover.
And I painted the cover, yes.
So now you also illustrated the inside of the book as well, right?
Yes. Actually, when this started, I conceived it as a big coffee table book of art. And I wanted enough narrative to string a dragon war together. I was going to tell the story of a war fought with dragons.
Ooh.
And so the working title for the longest time was The Dragon War, knowing that was a throwaway title, but that's what it was. When I started writing that backstory that would thread it together is when I realized I had more to say than pictures alone could tell. And that's when I became serious about, all right, this isn't just a simple story that'll give me captions for a bunch of photos. Now this is a story that I need to tell. So I need to get serious about the craft and stop being a gifted amateur or whatever it is I was, and get serious about this process and do it well. Because one thing I didn't want was for anybody to question the merits of the book simply because they knew me as an illustrator. I wanted it to be good enough to stand on its own, so I took it seriously.
Do you feel as if it took as much time to become proficient at the writing as it did to become proficient at the art?
Possibly. I mean, you don't just jump into either discipline and automatically get rave reviews and do it well, unless you're Christopher Paolini.
I don't know about the rave reviews, but
it's a process. They say you have to write 1 million words before you're a writer. They also say you have to paint with your media for 10 years before you're an illustrator or an artist. So I knew that I had to invest some time in doing it well in order to get it right. And I wouldn't have done it any other way. But the difference this time around was that I wasn't a 20-something art student starting to reign. There are similarities between creating a good illustration and writing a story, which maybe ease the process a little bit. I mean, I think narratively anyway. I always like an image with narrative in it. In fact, the class I teach at the Smart School is narrative illustration. Are we telling a story, or is this just a portrait? Or is it just a landscape? And I like a picture with a story in it. And to tell a good picture, you need to start with knowing, and the way I put it, where it finally started to make sense for me, in art school they talked about the focal point, or the center of interest. I like to think of it as the star of the painting. Who's the star of the painting? Who or what is the one most important thing that this picture is about? Usually it's a person or a thing, or a critter, but it can be something esoteric, like the relationship between two characters. So the way to put a spotlight on things is to have it contrast with everything else, and that's sort of how you put your protagonist in the spotlight as well.
I love that comparison, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that in art, whether paintings or fiction, it's contrast that draws your attention. And
absolutely. What is conflict but contrast?
Monotony is boring.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Do you feel as if you have an advantage over a traditional author in the sense that you were able to actually paint the scenes or draw the scenes from your book exactly the way you imagined it?
I don't know. You want to know the truth is not one of these images looks exactly the way I imagined it.
That was going to be my next question.
No, not even. This statue didn't really look like this in my mind's eye. It became sort of and I don't even know how to put it. It needed to be a quick read and be iconic in order to be a good book cover. In my mind's eye, it was more ornate and more three-dimensional and more spherical, actually, than disc-like. But this was just a better read. So that was a compromise. The interiors, I did 21 interiors for this book, and I did them in a pen and ink style, which means kind of right off the bat that they don't look the way I pictured it in my mind's eye, because I didn't picture them in pen and ink. They were in full color, and I think cinematically they were all movie screen width. They weren't tall and vertical, so it became another interpretation of them than the one that I was writing to, really.
Well, and I think art is always a compromise in some ways. You have the idea in your mind, and no one ever captures that idea fully.
Yeah, art is never finished, only abandoned.
Very true.
That's the saying.
True. So, do you feel like writing something you want to continue with now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I never really stopped, except for the last few years working on this illustration career in this genre. Even though I wasn't writing fiction during all my advertising years, I was writing adventures for my players. I DM'd. And that was like collaborative storytelling. And I think there's something instructive in that experience as well.
So, Todd, there's one thing we really have to talk about, which is dragons. You paint awesome dragons. You've worked out the musculature and skeletal structure of the dragons. You've written a book about dragons. So what is it about dragons? What do you love?
Nothing. I don't like dragons, really. No, I don't know what it is. I think it's that they resonate with us on a level that's kind of it precedes the written word. You know, the things that dragons have represented metaphorically to mankind for the longest of times are deeply subliminal. Different cultures have different views of dragons, but they seem to evoke those hidden, possibly sinister, or maybe just personally scary things that we all deal with as human beings.
Well, and from a mythological standpoint, unlike griffins or unicorns or other creatures, dragons are usually linked to the creation of the universe and the destruction of the universe.
Often, yeah. Ouroboros or any of the Asian dragons who are symbolic of storms or water or rivers or forces of nature, basically.
Do you have any favorite dragons in books or movies?
Well, I liked Smaug in the book better than I liked him in the movie.
You mean Smaug?
Smaug, excuse me. Smaug, yes.
I always thought it was Smaug. I still like Smaug.
Well, Deputy Bog.
Yeah, I guess.
Smaug, yes. I felt he was a little too talkative in the movie. Although he was talkative in the book. I liked the dragons in Reign of Fire. Those were quite well done.
Properly terrifying.
Yeah, and too often dragons in movies, you either don't get enough time with them on screen. Like Dragon Slayer was one of the first good dragon movies, but you only saw that dragon for 30 seconds over the course of this entire movie.
Same thing with the Harry Potter movies. They had some really nice dragons in there, but we barely saw them.
Yeah. The dragon in Dragonheart, Sean Connery's voice performance notwithstanding, didn't quite work for me. A little too anthropomorphic.
Yeah.
I liked Aragon. There haven't been a lot of dragons in fiction that made a huge impression on me, apart from the dragon Maleficent turned into, as seen through the windshield of the family car at a drive-in when I was probably 3. I made an impression.
That was a terrifying
There's
dragon.
a dragon outside our car. Wow, that is cool.
So when you approached the dragons in your book, was there something specific you wanted to do with them that you don't see being done with other authors or other depictions, or some feeling you wanted to capture?
Well, it wasn't that there was something different I wanted to do. I just wanted to do them the way I wanted to see them. I want dragons to be real. If they exist in this world, then they have to, at some level, try to obey the laws of physics as we know them. And so I was determined to, back when we were doing the designs for 3rd edition, I was determined to give them anatomy that made sense. Like, great big wings for a gigantic animal have to have great big muscles. And I was tired of seeing dragons that looked like alligators with cocktail umbrellas stuck in their sides.
Yeah.
Or big thunder thighs like a T-Rex. Dragons don't run around like an ostrich, they fly like a raptor. So more life and more. I wanted them to be a little more lean and efficient looking.
A little bit more like greyhounds than.
Yeah, well, more like cats than like Roadrunner.
Yeah.
So the dragons in my book, well, there's two kinds. But the ones they breed for the war machine are animals. They don't breathe fire. They're very intelligent. They even have internal language. But they don't hoard treasure, and they don't kidnap maidens or make deals with kings. They're animals, and they're bred to be like the tanks in this war.
Well, that's kind of, I'm thinking now of Anne McCaffrey's dragons, which she sort of fit in her science fiction framework, which is a different approach than, making it fantasy, where these are just simply mythological creatures who really couldn't exist in the real world.
Right.
And it sounds like you're going a little bit more, as you said, that a little more realistic
yeah,
approach.
I want them to be real.
Yeah. They're like the cool dinosaurs.
Yeah. They're like uber dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But then I also have high dragons in this book, which are a rare and mystical variant, which will get explained as the series goes on, but the people don't even really quite understand what they are. But they revere them, and they have opinions about them expressed as religious dogma or religious tests even, and that's a lot of what drives the story, is conflict over what the appearance of the summer dragon to Maya and her brother means to everybody.
Excellent. Well, I probably should have done this at the beginning of our interview, but let me ask you, what's the elevator pitch for the book?
Oh, the elevator pitch for the book. I didn't know the elevator pitch until after I sold it to Daw Books, but Maya and her family sell baby dragons to the political war machine. That was the one-line pitch.
Gotcha.
The one-word pitch might be Dragon Punk.
Dragon Punk. Well, actually, would you do us the honor of reading the first line of the book? Because I read the first line out loud the other day, and it was a great first line for the book. But since we have the author here and the artist here,
I was pretty proud of that first line, to be honest.
I think it's a good first line. I have not read the book yet. I'm going to be reading the book when I get home.
Put my eyeballs on. The Summer Dragon by Todd Lockwood. They were feeding the babies when the slaughter began.
What a great first line. They were feeding the babies when the slaughter began. Yeah. So now you're going to have to do book signings and presentations and all the stuff that the authors have to do, right?
I've been doing, yeah. It's, you know what? It's a whole lot less work than hanging an art show.
Really?
Yeah. Because you're still doing signings when you're hanging art. I'm not hauling an art show. I'm not putting stuff up on panels and filling out all the paperwork. I'm just enjoying a convention.
Awesome.
Doing what I would do anyway. It's sitting on a few panels and talking about stuff.
So who are some of the authors who've inspired you before and during this process?
Oh man. Well, I grew up on science fiction. And this is going to get mixed up with TV shows and movies too, because
go for it.
They're all part and parcel of the things that inspired me. But Alfred Bester, Arthur C. Clarke, Childhood's End is an amazing book. Isaac Asimov, of course, Bob Silverberg, Larry Niven, and Jerry Purnell. The Mote in God's Eye is one of my favorite science fiction books ever. It's very, it's like a warning to us here, the plight of the movies. Ray Bradbury ranks high. But then in a similar vein as Ray Bradbury is Rod Serling, The Twilight Zone, or just his brilliant contribution to the movie Planet of the Apes. You can hear him in the dialogue, especially in the early part of that movie.
I never knew he worked on it.
He worked on that, yeah. He was one of the screenwriters on that. Somebody was telling me the story of that here, and I hadn't heard it told that way before. He made it sound like the studio had a screenplay that wasn't working, and they brought Rod Serling in to fix it.
Well, the ending of the original Planet of the Apes movie is certainly a Twilight Zone ending.
It certainly is, yeah.
Now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for doing this
It was a
interview.
pleasure. Thank you,
And
Christopher.
I encourage everyone to check out Todd's new book, The Summer Dragon. And thank you for watching. And be sure to tune in again next time.